The process of unpacking one's privilege and sort of place in society and the world is an ongoing process. And I had not really noticed how much of a bubble of privilege I live in until I dyed my hair purple. A move that some of my Vanderbilt Divinity School classmates called irredeemably queer-coded. And it is perhaps worth noting that most of my classmates at the Vanderbilt Divinity School are younger than me, and a lot of them are a lot queerer than I make any claims of being. And when my hair was red, I could, depending on what I chose to wear, largely pass as a middle-of-the-road, fairly basic, middle-aged white lady. In other words, I was kind of invisible. And that allowed me to kind of drift in and out of the spaces in which I do my daily business in Middle Tennessee without significant challenges. I joked sometimes with my younger activist friends that if they ever needed an Auntie Karen to get them out of sticky situations with law enforcement, they could totally call me and I would wear that identity like a weapon. But after I changed my hair, I lost that privilege of relative anonymity. I had a lot more conversations about my appearance than I have had at any other time in my adult life. And some of them have been affirming, with people in stores saying, "Your hair looks awesome. How'd you do that?" And I'm like, "I don't know, my hairdresser Natalie, she's a magician, it's great." And some of them are not. My favorite example of having a conversation with someone who was not thrilled about my hair being purple was when the server at Waffle House prayed over me in gratitude to God that her daughter wasn't there to see my hair because she was afraid her daughter would use my purple hair as justification for dyeing her own hair purple. And being quite hungry and really in need of, eggs, I just sat there a little uncomfortably rather than engage in a conversation with this stranger or debate with her about the philosophies of hair and parenting. I just wanted breakfast. And the process of peeling back and becoming aware of one's own privilege is exactly that, a process. One you don't notice until you notice it. So I didn't notice this until I changed my appearance in a way that people understood how I related to the world. And this was peeling back some degree of privilege because I'm still the same 40-something woman. I'm still married to the same man. I still have the same feral children I had before. I mostly wear the same clothes. It's just that my hair is now purple. But when my hair was not a weird or funky color, I could drift through the world and not attract attention for the ways in which I am different from the world. And neurodivergent people sometimes call the work of fitting in with the dominant culture masking, because often that effort starts with the face. For folks who don't read social cues well, often we have to make an effort to make sure our faces are doing the correct things in polite company. The things that neurotypical faces do automatically, naturally. This is one of those skills that is caught, not taught. That is, you learn it by observing other people. You catch it, rather than someone tells you, when someone says something that makes you happy, you should smile and nod. If you think they're sad, you should make a sympathetic face. You got to work on that if it doesn't come natural, if you don't catch it. It's not that neurodivergent people, and I include myself in that category, it's not that we don't have feelings or that we can't read emotions necessarily and that we lack empathy. It's that we don't always automatically respond in the expected ways. And in a world where social expectations are set by the neurotypicals, we try to pass. And it's similar to code switching, where a person switches how they present themselves or speak to fit in with dominant white culture in the United States. And although they are not the same, the one thing that code switching and matching absolutely have in common is that they can be exhausting. I can't really speak to code switching, but one of the reasons I value my time at home so greatly is because no one in my house is expecting me not to fidget or manage my face in the ways that people at work or school or apparently the Waffle House are expecting me to. And so what does this have to do with being a Unitarian Universalist in the South? Or really, and really when I say the South, I mean the Southeast where we live, but I also mean other areas where we as Unitarian Universalists are the holders of minority opinions and beliefs, For example, issues like LGBTQIA inclusion or reproductive health care or economic justice, because the South is not the only region in the United States where UUs face this as their lived reality. But our task in these areas is different than in areas where public institution and our institutional positions on issues like these are more in alignment. And I think for a lot of us, we mask when we are outside UU spaces. Maybe we don't say the full thing that pops into our head when somebody at work or the PTA or the grocery store says, I mean, those people are okay. I love them, but... because we're just trying to get our eggs. Or sometimes you just remember that we live in a state that has banned gender-affirming care for minors and decided that the best way to reduce the amount of violence in our schools is to allow teachers to carry concealed weapons. And in fact, when that last thing happened, when the state legislature and governor made it the law that teachers could concealed carry in class to keep our children safe, my stepmother, a retired teacher in Michigan, who very much wants to see her grandkids more often than she does, she called me. And she couldn't call me fast enough. And as a good lefty liberal, she thought this was terrible and used it in her ongoing campaign to convince my husband and I to move ourselves and our children. Really, if we would just leave the children, I think that'd be fine with her. Nearer to her and my dad. And often when conversations about equity come up in the legislatures in these places where UU values are in the minority, we find people saying some variation on the following. Why don't you just move already? If all the people who believed this moved away, it's a thing, right? Who here has heard that sentence at some point about living in the South? All right. And there are lots of reasons to move and lots of reasons to stay, but the first thing to acknowledge is not everyone can move. It's an economic privilege to pick up and rearrange your life. And second, someone needs to stay put and do the work of equity and belonging, even when it is hard. And we also need spaces of rest and replenishment where we can restore ourselves and experience solidarity. We need spaces in which we can unmask and not care if we pass or fit in or not, because here we have a space of inclusion and equity. Our spaces, therefore, must be welcoming spaces, spaces where we find strength and joy, spaces where people come and see their full selves reflected with joy and respect for the fullness of their identities. Because of who we are and what we believe, because of our shared values, we must create for each other and those we would walk with in doing the hard work of creating social justice. UU spaces, including this church, have long been spaces in which many of us can be our full selves and drop our masks and feel safe and included. I would think about the history of this church, where in the 1980s we hosted dances for the LGBTQ community as a space, as a way we created safety where there was very little. An example of this is a while back, a friend who lives in Texas and homeschools her non-binary teen because the local public schools are not safe for a gender non-conforming kid, reached out to me about what UU churches are like because she'd heard about a homeschool co-op that was hosted in a UU church not far from where they live. In Texas terms, I think it's over an hour drive for them, but Texas is big. Both she and her kid were nervous about going into a church, which in Texas usually means one thing to them. It means it is unwelcoming for their family. But she knew I'm a proud Unitarian Universalist, and so asked me if I thought it would be safe for them. I told her I was sure the church would be welcoming. I couldn't speak for the co-op, but I knew the church would be a safe place, and I couldn't imagine they would host a group that would be unsafe for my friend and her kid. And so they went. And instantly felt welcome because when they walked in, the church was decorated in pride flags and had gender-inclusive restrooms. And the church didn't change the entire world that day, but they did change everything for a moment for my friend and her kid. And our vision statement here says that we are not afraid of the hard work. And that work is part of how we create equity. We learn about justice, we have encounters with people who are different from us, we grow into our full humanity, and we have vulnerable conversations. We do the work of integrating that into ourselves so that when we go forth into the world, we have the vision of what a just and equitable world is with us, in our bones. And when we return from that world, we have the care of a community that is willing to hold us. So for me, if the worst of it is that people think my purple hair is weird or they think I'm gay because I have purple hair, I can live with that. I am relatively safe. But after all, it's only hair, and a year from now it'll probably be different again. But I also appreciate that last week, here at First UU, a friend noticed my hair and mentioned that she thought she'd seen a picture on Facebook of my hair in a normal color, that like I dyed my hair brown or something, which I absolutely did not do. It was maybe a memory or something, but she was really glad that it wasn't a normal color and that it was actually purple. Compared with having strangers pray over me, that was life-giving. And sometimes masking is necessary. It's how we keep ourselves safe. It's how we keep ourselves employed. Sometimes drifting through the world without being challenged is kind of nice. And I recognize that as privilege. But that afternoon at the Waffle House, when the woman prayed over my purple hair, it was actually turned out okay. Once I had my eggs and food in front of me, we actually had a really nice conversation with mostly about my server's daughter, who's working really hard at school and of whom that server is super, super proud. And so that was an encounter with someone who saw me as different, but got to see me as a person next. And sometimes knowing who has your back when you have the courage to say that thing, when you go into the world to advocate for the things that matter to you, when you take the next step toward becoming who you were always meant to be, is that kind of life-giving experience. When members of this church go to the state legislature and speak their own truths or speak to the science before a legislature with a supermajority that rejects what we believe, they do so in the knowledge that we are all there with them in spirit. We have their back. They do so knowing that we will celebrate victories and commiserate defeats here. People who aren't a part of this congregation see us here and in the world and know that they are not alone. And people who don't agree with us can see who we are together and can learn that they are not a monolith in our culture here. They can see that although we affirm LGBTQIA folks or support measures that end gun violence, we are not, in fact, baby-eating cannibals. We are people who keep a tidy property and have an inviting playground. The people who come to our spaces, join us for church or as community members, using our space, see who we are and what we believe, and that presence matters. Since my longest standing commitment to this community has been as a member of the choir, I have spent a lot of Thursday nights here, in this room. And one of the things I've noticed is that people from the surrounding neighborhood walk our grounds as part of their routines, either on their own or a lot of them with their dogs. And I will admit I pay a lot of attention to the dogs as they walk by because, and sometimes they are people we know who know us, but some of them are just neighbors. And sometimes I wonder about who they are and what they think of this place with the pride flags and the Black Lives Matter banner, where we clearly value children as well as the earth. What do they think of us? And I hope what they see is a community of people who care for each other and their community, and who may believe differently while also being fully human. Blessed be and amen.